Um, right, so Eric, 75, so that's probably one thing. So I've had quite a few life experiences. So I live in Hampshire in the UK. So I've been here now for about 40 years. Been married 39 years now, with my wife Andrea, and we have
Congrats to that.
the marriage is a challenge. Staying married is probably one of the most difficult things we do in life. It's not easy. And
Well,
that
I gotta
being,
say, as we're going, I'll just say I'm 38, so you're longer than I've been
it's
alive. So
amazing,
it took a lot for me
amazing.
to get to this stage. So I can imagine
Yeah.
what it was like to be married for that long. So that's definitely something worth clapping for.
I think when we grow up as we're kids, we expect all these things to be quite easy and straightforward, but they never are they? So I guess mental health, I struggled quite a bit probably in the first up to the age of about 50, but that now I think I'm starting to find solutions in life which have helped me in my mental health journey. I guess it starts really with my mum, who was probably the biggest influence. And when I look at what my mum went through, so she escaped a genocide when she was a toddler. Smyrna was burnt to the ground in 1922 in September, strangely enough. And so she was then a refugee with my grandparents for about 20 years. And she arrived in the UK during World War II. So she had a very hard first part of her life. And then in the sort of 70s, she started with multiple sclerosis and gradually lost the use of both legs and then both hands. So for about the last 15 years of her life, all she could do was move her head from side to side. And so it was very, very difficult. There were times she said she wanted to die. We could totally understand that. And she said, she even asked us if it would help her to die, but wasn't something we could do. And
So
she
what
went,
year frame was this?
had about 1970 and she passed away in 2001. So she had it for about 31 years, multiple sclerosis. It was terrible disease. In those days, they didn't really have any for her. They just said that it would be something that would progress and get worse.
Yes.
And so,
Yes. The way of times have changed so much in the 70s when she was diagnosed to even make to the 2000s. Society in itself changed drastically. And so, we want to talk about is how affected you and your mental health being there to support. And then, do you have siblings who were there to help as well?
yes, so I had two brothers and two sisters. My mum's journey was quite remarkable because her mother was a carer and her mother died when she was 99 and three quarters. And then my mum's sister and brother, they also helped. So she had amazing care. But the one story which was really important for me was that she went into a coma and her breathing was this horrible kind of gurgling sound. And so she was rushed to hospital, and the doctor said there was nothing they could do for her because that gurgling sound they nicknamed the death rattle. And so we called a priest, and none of us really had a faith at the time, but mum was brought up Catholic. And so the priest came and he prayed. And as he prayed, my mum's breathing relaxed and it changed, and the gurgling sound seemed to disappear. And then maybe 10 minutes after the priest walked out the door, my mum came round. She didn't know what happened. She didn't know the priest had been. She didn't know she's in hospital. And when we explained all this to her, she then found reason to go in. She thought her healing was a miracle, and so she found some kind of purpose to keep going. And so that was another 11 years she had to live, being paralysed from the neck down, just being able to move her head from side to side. And so I watched my mum for all those years, and especially the last 11 years after that coma, and how she managed to cope with that kind of illness. And I can't truthfully understand where she found the strength from, because she was a really kind and caring person, and she was always more kind of worried about how we were rather than how she was.
Mm-hmm.
And so from just looking at her, she didn't really say much about it, but just looking at her and her life and how she was coping with it from day to day, I thought, well, if she can do that, then I've got to find something from somewhere. She's passing on. And so I truthfully say of my mum that she was the strongest person I will ever meet, because I can't ever meet anybody who will suffer for 30 years like that and endure it. And for the last 11 years, endure it with a kind of of kindness. It's my understanding that anyway. But
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
yeah,
That's a very story.
yeah,
And the desire to keep going through those tough times, I can definitely see how that would be something that you how are you on the inside to when you're having a tough day, to look back at that and
mm,
if she went through that, then you can overcome whatever obstacle you are going through.
yeah.
So what are the some of that you had to reach back to that inner power that your mom? What are some of the things that helped you overcome?
Right, just one quick extra with the story of my mum. So she survived all that and she lived through it. But my dad, on the other hand, he couldn't cope seeing my mum with multiple sclerosis, and he started drinking. And within a very short time, he died an alcoholic.
Hmm.
So although he had his physical strength, he didn't kind of the that my mum had. And so I looked at both, and we only lived a 5 minutes walk apart. So I used to see all the time. So anyway, that was 2001. She passed away. So how did that happen to me? So 2011, I had tests done for cancer, and the doctor phoned. He said, "I urgently want to see you," which is not a good thing for a doctor to say. And he
Hmm.
said, "You have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma." And so that was a name I knew. A friend of ours had that cancer, and she died a year later. So the thing is, when you're diagnosed with these things, you don't know whether you've got a cancer that's treatable or it's going to be a cancer that kills you.
Yes.
So I guess within 5 or 10 minutes of the doctor phoning up, I'm very quiet and reflected, and my wife was next to me as well at the time. And I made one prayer, and I only made it once, and it was my faith. And it was, Lord, the wisdom, the strength, the peace, and the serenity to live with the cancer, whether it's going to be a death sentence or just an inconvenience. Um, and I can say that from the moment of making that prayer, the thought of never troubled me at all. Um, and I was at peace with it. And it was a peace that's beyond my understanding, because you should really have fear and worry and anxiety. Um, my wife, on the other hand, um, when I was at peace and that I made that prayer, my wife said, "Well, what about me?" I said, "Well, I can't help you. I've told you how I found peace, and it's up to you. You can do the same." But she couldn't do it. So how things affect different people, the same news affects different people, um, it is profound. I can't put peace onto her. So I've never once prayed for healing, because although I now have a faith, I've never once healing, because for me healing is too complicated, because I know people that have faith pray when they have cancer and they still die. Um, so my prayer, only made that prayer the once, the following day, thank you for a day of peace. And so that was my continued prayer. And so as a kind of a joke, um, I say for me, it's easier to talk about cancer than it is about going shopping with my wife, because shopping with my wife caused me a certain amount of stress.
Oh, I
Which
definitely consent.
so we're on a similar journey then, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're on a journey. So the part about cancer, I've never prayed for healing. So I go to a men's thing about supporting men with mental health. One of the things we do is we say a mood score. So if you're feeling rock bottom, you say your mood score is 1, and if you're euphoric, your mood score is a 10. So every week I say my mood score is about 7 to 8. And I say next week my mood score will be 7 to 8, no matter what happens, whether it's life or death or cancer or anything, because I have to get up in the morning and I have to face life. And if my mood scores are 2, or I'm anxious or worried and anything, being a 2 is not going to help me. I've still got to get through the day. And so in my older age, I am learning to accept that whatever happens, I want my mood score to be a 7 or 8. So like the cancer, I made the one prayer once, and 10, 15 minutes, it was a very short time. I mean, time didn't really time when the doctor phoned up. but it was a very short time. And in that one prayer, I dealt with the cancer. So it's now 2024, so 13 years. Did have to go back and have bits more done with cancer a couple of years ago. But that opportunity to say to my family and friends that at some point I'm going to die, but I don't want you to be grieving. When I think of the things that we've done together of life, because I know it causes a lot of people a lot of problems, and people can be grieving for years and years and years, and I don't want to be. No, no, no.
So you used your, this that was something that stuck with you, right? If
Yeah.
she can overcome that, then you can overcome cancer, and regardless of whatever it is, you have to tackle it head on and with the attitude. Like I said, if you're a 2, then you still have to deal with it, but your energy is getting off negative energy, and your mind would be clouded a bit because you're so anxious about what you have to do instead of figuring out ways to enjoy life with your grandkids or your friends and family right now.
Yeah. So just another follow-on bit with the cancer. I think the first time I went to the oncologist, we had about an hour's wait in the hospital, which is probably standard in the UK, even be a lot longer. And then when I went in to see the oncologist, they almost seemed more nervous than I was. I guess he was looking at the notes about cancer, and he was probably telling me about the stuff he saw on the screen. And then when it came time to go, he wanted to give me this leaflet all about cancer. And I said, "You're wasting your time. That's going straight in the bin. I won't read it, because I don't want to read through a leaflet and say, if I've got this symptom or that symptom, it could be this, that, and the other. That's too complicated. If things happen, deal with it. And until then, I don't want to know about all the what if questions. They're too complicated for me." And so when I think back, you mentioned mum. And so I was only diagnosed with cancer, but I still had my health and my fitness, where my mum had multiple sclerosis, but she didn't have a health and fitness. She was paralysed. So from her to my story of cancer, for me, that was quite an easy thing to deal with. So, I mean,
And how about around you? You said your wife didn't take it so easily. What about your kids and friends? How were you during that time?
I guess possibly I kind of dismissed it. It seemed to be okay, and because I do tend to smile about things and joke about things. They probably didn't take it quite as seriously. I mean, I'm very good now with cancer, but again, you don't know what cancer you've been given, and you don't quite know whether they've caught it in time or. So it's how you deal with the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
So the prayer just put the cancer to bed. If it's going to kill me in a year's time, I want to live in peace. I want to get up tomorrow and do the stuff tomorrow, and I don't want to be bothering about cancer. I just want to get on with life. If it causes my hair to fall out or other bits that happen with cancer, then I'll deal with that when it happens. I'm not going to fuss about it. Yeah. But at my age, I'm going to die from something. That is inevitable. The when is the question, isn't it? The how, I don't know. So truthfully, when I made that prayer, it just felt like kind of peace just me. And that was cancer dealt with. That was it. That was done.
Hey, because you said 13 years ago, so you were what, 60, 61?
62, something like that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so and I want to appreciate the time that you had, because at that time, I imagine your kids were grown and you might have already been a grandfather at that time. So you want to
Yes.
appreciate the time that you have. And I think hearing you talk about this right now, what comes to my mind is, as a old, I can remember back in my 20s when I thought, I know people never old, right? And now I'm almost there, and it's like, we're all invincible, and eventually we all will pass. You just don't know when, but as you get older, you realize that you're closer to the end than you are at the beginning at that point, and you just want to appreciate the time that you do have, and that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, yeah. So I borrowed time, but I looked so up in the 80s and 90s for inspiration. So that's where I'm at the moment now, and I'll come to one of the stories maybe about that later on. So just after I was diagnosed with cancer, I was sacked work or
Oh,
fired, as
man.
they say. So I worked with challenging behaviour for quite a number of years, and that's a fear. Fear is a very strange thing. So when you say you work with people with challenging behaviour, they don't understand things very well. They don't have very good language, or some of them say things like coffee, bed, toilet, and things like that. But they had all the wants that you and I would have, but they couldn't really express what they needed. And sometimes, if you got things wrong or you didn't understand them, you get hit. And that was part of the job that I was doing. And so the strategy I learned from that was that for me, it was better to be hit than to live in fear of being hit. And I've lost count the amount of times I've been punched, kicked, had things thrown at me, doors slammed in my face, and all kinds of stuff. I had a glass smashed over me, and
Mm.
but I saw a number of other staff that if these things happened to them, they would probably go off sick and then give the notice in and leave. But I found I cared about these guys who looked after that. You have to connect to them to help them to get dressed, or help them to have a bath, or help them with their dinner or something. You just stand right next to them, and if you give them peas instead of beans or something, or they didn't want gravy, or they wanted, and they couldn't make you understand what they wanted, you did it hits. And I kind of accepted that's, well, if that's what happens, that's what happens. But all the guys I was working with, so that was kind of a price worth paying in a way. The doctors out of a 2 year period couldn't seem to give me a definitive answer of what my cancer was. I kept going back every couple of months or something for tests and results and some bits. And it got to the point where I said, enough's enough. I'm not coming back next. This is the final one. Because in a way I thought I was wasting their time and my time, and I hate hospitals. So I treated cancer 10, 15 minutes after getting the phone call. That it was just accept it and get on with life.
Yeah. And
I
so
don't.
let me ask, how have your story to help those around you? Like some of the that you may know, like a brother or some close friend, may not have had the mental strength to deal with mental struggles. How have you helped them overcome some of their struggles?
Right. And that's a problem. Um, probably there's just a tiny, tiny little bit of the story. I think going back to the time about getting sacked. So, and this is to deal with things mentally. So, and it was what they did. I'm not going to say what it was or the company was, but it was working with these guys for 10 years, not having a day off, sick, and then unfortunately, I'm a bit troublemaker at times. I did have words with the director, which were in conflict, and very shortly after, I had a warning notice, and then shortly after that, I was sacked, and it was very unfair what they did. But and this is how I deal with things. When they said you're sacked, I said, "Can I come back as a volunteer?"
Hmm.
So clearly they said no, and I disregarded that. And so I was sacked on Monday, and the Friday I went back to the place I worked, and I took some of the guys to a club, and I did pretty much every Friday night for about 10 years. And twice a year, I used to take a couple of guys on holiday as a volunteer. So had I been working for them, all that would have been paid for. So I've given them about a year's wages for free, and that's what gave me the sack. And my mental health was sorted the moment I said, "Can I come back as a volunteer?" That was the moment it was sorted out, because now, 13 years later, so it's about 2 months in between being diagnosed with cancer and getting fired. So all these things happen at the same time. I say it's to do about 2,000 hours of voluntary work, and it is to hold on to sort of anger and hate and resentment for 13 years. I dealt with that when they said you're sacked, and I said, "Can I come back as a volunteer?" Difficult concept to put across to people, but a lot of health that I come across is to do with holding on to anger.
That's very. I've never looked at it like that, but that That's insightful. You could have spent the next 13 years, hold up in the house and bitter and anger, and that rage would have built inside of you and maybe would have been unleashed on those you love the most
Oh, yeah,
inadvertently.
indeed.
Instead of you let it go and was able to find peace and still do what you love to do through those 13 years.
Yeah. So that when I went back as a volunteer, I had far more enjoyable encounters as a volunteer than I did when I was working for the company. Because we weren't constrained like we were. And a lot of things now are so tied up with policies and procedures and writing this, and where as a volunteer, it was doing stuff that these guys wanted to do. So we went on to Germany, to Austria, Switzerland, all around the UK. We took them on clubs, we were outings on boats, and yeah, all stuff. And so
Oh,
the vote was brilliant, for the world. And almost I had to be sacked to appreciate, the
strange of realities, right?
yeah,
Where you
yeah,
you took something that was so negative, because we
yeah,
all need to make a living, and you turned it into something positive. But
yeah.
how did a quick follow up? What did you end up doing for a living, like to bills?
So doing voluntary work, but karma is profound and things very strange. Because I volunteered in the kind of jobs that I was doing. I went to the club on the Friday night after being sacked and said to a few people, I've just been sacked and this, that, and the other. And then I offered a job and I started in a week or two's time. It was like 2 weeks holiday and yeah, working again. Working now, but COVID unfortunately stopped the paid job I do. But now I do quite a bit of voluntary work instead, and I find it far more challenging and rewarding.
That's great to hear how the universe just took care of you with that.
Mm.
You're opened up and told the people that you got sacked, and then just like that, you were able
Yeah,
to bounce on your feet, and that shows us, they knew what type of person you were and wanted to hire you on.
very strange. So I've gone through life and I've never had a career. I left school with a qualification in woodwork, which doesn't do you any good really in life. I've had maybe 35, 40 jobs in my life, all these sort of low paid jobs, but somehow or other to feed the family, pay the mortgage, and survive. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to have earned more money and had a nicer car or something, but looking at it, car's a car. It's a sort of £50,000 one or a 5,000. It's your own.
I say this when I'm in Washington D.C. There's a lot of traffic, some of the worst traffic in the United States. And when I see a Porsche or a Jaguar or something next to me, really expensive car, driving my Honda, it's like we're going the same speed. We're both going the same place. You can't go all this traffic.
No, no. Well, they have the feel good factor, don't they, if they can afford and show off their Jags and Porsches and things. Yeah. So the other thing too, sorry, I don't think hope is the right word because there is a false hope, isn't there? And I think truthfully, have a diagnosis with cancer or hearts or whatever it might be, you don't know whether your diagnosis is going to kill you or it's just going to be an inconvenience. Um, so when they said Hodgkin's lymphoma, which killed our friend in about a year ago, that's the only connection I had with Hodgkin's lymphoma. I didn't know other people who'd had that disease, just that our friend had it. And so hope is I wouldn't say hope. Now you accept the diagnosis you've had, you look at your options, you've got to wake up in the morning and do stuff. And if you're depressed and anxious, it's not going to make any difference. Or if you're feeling okay, it's just your take on the world. And I think, like my mum, it's to the world and face the day in as kind and caring a way as you can. I'd hope to have met street past the thing that I did, but if you say time's right, that's something. Because one of this at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and we come into contact with all kinds of people, suicide and people who are angry. We in the middle of very drunk, angry, violent fights with broken bottles. bars, who've asked to hand over a knife. And so that we're doing, but that's probably another skill. It is prayer. And one quick thing with the street pastors, the prayer. So I can remember the first big fight, and it's where you see the problems. So if you see a lot of angry, drunken, violent people, you search for one solution. But if you see people who are loved by God and loved by their family and friends, you look for a solution. And I remember the first big fight we encountered, maybe about a dozen or so people, and it was quite a violent fight. And we have all the policies and procedures which say we should stand back and call the police, but we know that there's very few police about and they don't come very quickly. Or the other thing we can do is pray and walk towards the fight. And so we walked it, and there's nothing you can say. When we got there, I just tried walking in between people fighting. I held out my hand to try and stop the guy in front hitting the guy behind me, and there was people all over the place shouting and swearing, and just a lot of people getting hit. But my prayer is for my peace, and I only pray for my peace because that's what I can control. I can't control anybody else. And so I pray for the peace and serenity to do God's will. And I can only say that in all that kind of mayhem and anger and fear, and I don't know what's happening behind me or at the side of me, I don't know. All I know is there's angry people. I keep that peace. And it's almost like a sponge where they take away my peace, they absorb my peace, and I try and absorb their anger. And in a matter of, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 minutes, the fight gradually stops. And there's just 3 lads to hold down this great big lad, and they're trying to wrestle him to stop getting involved with the fight. And I remember going up to this big lad and putting my hand on his shoulder and telling the other 3 lads to let go of him. And they let go. I had my hands on this big lad's shoulder. I can't remember the things, but I just remember there was lots of shouting and things, and things calmed down. Right, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So suicide all the time. Yesterday, even. But one thing with suicide, I mean, friends and family listen to your story, then go to your funeral. And the dynamic people is that they don't want to die, but you want the pain to stop, and you don't know how to stop the pain other than death. But death is a very final solution to a temporary problem, and I think with all there is hope. I've walked in people in the process of committing suicide. That face to face, I had a conversation with somebody on a multi-story car park. He was sat on the wall on a multi-story car park. Anyway, time. Journey. It's a journey, Darren. It's a journey. I saw somebody 10 years ago who was suicidal, and I journeyed with him for about 10 years, not regularly, but I bump into him now and again in town, and